The mind in conflict is a fire that feeds itself. It replays the argument, searching for a better ending. It sharpens the response it never gave. It circles the unanswered question until that question becomes the entire room. We have been taught that this burning is necessary, that somewhere inside the replay, the perfect response will emerge, the answer will arrive, the situation will finally become clear. It does not. The Buddha saw what the world prefers not to examine. He called it the second arrow, the one we fire into ourselves, long after the first has already landed. The first arrow is the pain that reaches us, the loss, the injustice, the silence where words should have been. The second is everything we add afterward. The arguing, the claiming, the demanding of answers that life is not giving. Most people carry both arrows for years, never knowing the second one is optional. The second arrow, the Buddha taught, is the source of most of what we call suffering. This teaching is not about giving up or going quiet. It is about finding something the reactive mind has never reached. That beneath the noise of every argument, every unanswered question, everything you have needed to say, there is a stillness that belongs to you, that has always belonged to you. You need not believe anything to be here. Many people listening right now are carrying exactly what you are carrying. This space is yours. This is the power of not reacting. We find it beginning now. The original hurt was brief. A word in a particular tone, a silence where there should have been a response, an expression that crossed someone's face and was gone before it could even be named, something that lasted in its original form for under a second, for less than the time it takes to draw a breath. And yet the weight of it is still here. Hours later, or days later, or longer, the original moment is long finished, and the pain it produced is still running. The mind is still working it over. The body is still holding it. The conversation that was never spoken is still being rehearsed toward an outcome that keeps receding. And you have been watching this happen. That is what makes this particular kind of suffering so distinctive. You can see it. You can observe the thought returning to the same moment and producing the same spike of feeling it produced the first time, and the fifth time, and the 12th. You can notice that the conversation you are rehearsing is not going anywhere, that lying awake with it is costing you the rest that tomorrow needs. That the mind is building something much larger than what originally happened. The seeing is very clear, and the seeing does not stop it. This is where the tradition begins. Not with the suffering itself. Suffering is simply part of being alive. But with this specific quality of suffering, the kind that the knowing self can see clearly and cannot touch. The loop that continues despite being recognized. The pattern that runs beneath the level where understanding operates. If you have ever watched yourself fire the second arrow, watched the mind take a wound that has already been received and begin adding to it, building on it, elaborating it into something that will outlast the original event by weeks, and been unable to stop it despite seeing it happening, then you already understand what the tradition was examining, not suffering in the abstract. This specific kind, in the specific gap between what we can see and what we can change. Bring to mind, gently, something unresolved, something still present somewhere in the body right now. Hold it lightly. We are going to follow what the mind has been doing with it. Not to analyze it, but to actually see it. To locate the place where the brief original thing became the weight that is still here. The original moment, stripped of everything added since. How long did it actually last? The tone of voice, the silence, the expression, at its most essential, before interpretation began, it was a few seconds at most. The world arrived. Something made contact. And then, before thought had even formed, something in the mind named it unpleasant. This happens faster than decision. The naming is old and trained, running below the level of deliberate thought, the way a hand moves back from heat before the thinking brain has registered anything. The contact was labeled before there was any choice to label it. And from that label, the thinking arrived. This is familiar. This confirms something. This is what I know about this person, this pattern, this kind of day. The original contact, those few seconds, became the first stone of something much larger. And then the building began. This is the part the tradition was most precise about, and the part that is hardest to catch because it happens so quickly and feels so natural. Once the thought arrived, once the mind had named the contact and produced an initial interpretation, a second process started running alongside it. The mind began pulling in evidence from elsewhere. Moments from weeks ago that now felt relevant, other occasions when this same shape of wound appeared, the whole accumulated history of times when something similar landed in a similar place. Arguments formed for conversations that never took place and may never take place. A more complete version of the other person assembled itself in the mind. Not the person who was actually there for those few seconds, but a more thorough version, carrying everything that made this particular contact land where it did. The original moment is finished, but the building is ongoing. And the building, not the original wound, is where the second arrow keeps landing. You can feel the truth of this right now in the situation being held. How much of what is actually present, the weight, the heat, the specific quality of this feeling, is the original moment, and how much is everything the mind has built around it? Not as an accusation, the building is not a moral failure. As an honest observation, often, when we look closely, the original stone is much smaller than the monument on top of it. Much of the weight is construction. And the construction has a fuel. The mind does not build monuments randomly. Something powers the ongoing work. Something that makes the thought return for the 12th time with the same energy it had the first. Something that keeps the rehearsed conversation running even when the rational mind has noticed it is going nowhere. The tradition identified 3 things that feed the building, and they run so close together it can be hard to tell them apart from the inside. Each one has a texture. Each one can be felt directly in the situation being held, if the attention is brought there carefully enough. The first is wanting the situation to be different from what it is, or in painful situations, wanting to push the feeling away, to make it stop, to reach some resolution that would allow the mind to put the weight down. The reaching and the pushing are the same fuel, flowing in opposite directions. The mind builds because it believes, at some level, that building toward resolution is the same as moving toward it. The rehearsal feels like preparation. The case building feels like problem solving. The mind is convinced it is doing useful work, that if it just runs the scenario one more time, something will become clear that wasn't clear before. But the resolution keeps receding because what is actually happening is not problem solving, but the second arrow in motion, the fuel masquerading as the cure. Find that fuel in your own situation right now. The wanting it different. The push toward resolution. It has a particular quality, a tension in the movement of thought, a forward lean, the sense that if the mind just works this a little harder, it will finally arrive somewhere the weight can be set down. Feel how long that tension has been running. The second fuel is something quieter but often deeper. The insistence on a particular story about who you are in this situation and what this event means about that. A story about your worth, your place, what you deserve, how you are supposed to be regarded. This is the fuel that makes the same wound available at the same emotional intensity weeks later, because the wound is not just about what happened, but about what it seemed to confirm or threaten about the story of who you are. The monument keeps getting built because the monument is not just about the event. It is about protecting a particular account of the self, an account that says, I am someone who deserves better than this, or I am someone this always happens to, or I am someone whose worth requires this to be acknowledged and corrected. The exact story varies, but the building continues because the story continues to feel like something that needs protecting. And the third fuel is certainty, the fixed view of what the event meant, what the other person intended, what the correct reading of it is. The mind settles into this view and defends it against everything that might complicate it. A moment of warmth from the other person gets reinterpreted. Evidence that doesn't fit gets quietly edited out. The view maintains itself with the same automatic efficiency as the naming did, running below the level of deliberate choice. These three things together, the reaching, the self-protection, the certainty, are what make the second arrow so hard to put down even when it has been recognized. Knowing about the second arrow does not reach the place where the reaching is happening, the place where the self-protection is running, the place where the fixed view is maintaining itself. The knowing lives at a different level than the firing. This is why understanding the mechanism is not enough. The mechanism runs faster than understanding can arrive. The building is already underway before the watching self has noticed the original wound has landed. And when the watching self does arrive, when the knowing looks at the construction and says this is the second arrow, the fuels are already at work, and knowing their names does not drain them. What the tradition developed over centuries of working with exactly this problem was not a better understanding of the mechanism. It was a specific kind of attention, cultivated gradually, practiced in particular ways that could arrive earlier in the sequence. earlier than the building, earlier than the naming, even into the gap between contact and the first automatic movement of the mind toward elaboration. That gap is real. It is very small, smaller than a breath, smaller usually than any deliberate thought. But it exists, and the tradition found ways to make it larger, through a quality of attention that, with patient practice, begins to recognize the contact before the naming runs, the naming before the thought forms, the thought before the building starts. Each recognition arrives a fraction earlier in the sequence. Each fraction is meaningful because the second arrow is in flight before the hand is seen lifting it, and what cannot be seen cannot be interrupted. But what can be seen, even imperfectly, even one time in 5, can be paused. And a pause, however brief, is where something other than the automatic becomes possible. Try it, gently, right now, with the situation held from before. Find the original contact, stripped of everything built since. The specific word, the silence, the expression, just that brief, already finished. And then notice the weight of what has been built around it since. Feel the difference between those two things, the original contact and the monument. The building has been real, and the fuels powering it are honest responses to genuine pain. But see them separately. Know which part of what is being carried is the original wound, and which part is what the mind has been doing with it since. The tradition uses the image of a fire cooling, not extinguished by force, but cooled because the fuel is recognized, and gradually, carefully, stopped being added. A mind learning to see the building does not become closed to pain. It does not stop feeling. It becomes, slowly, the kind of mind that can receive what life brings, fully, honestly, without the automatic construction that turns a moment of hurt into a season of it. Every time the building runs to completion, every time the second arrow flies all the way through the elaboration, a groove in the mind deepens. The next time a similar contact arrives, the building starts faster, the same shape of wound, the same size of monument, assembled more efficiently, until reacting in this particular way to this particular kind of contact stops feeling like a response and starts feeling like who you are. But a groove is worn by repetition, and a different kind of repetition wears a different groove. Every time the building is caught, the contact seen before the naming runs, the naming seen before the thought elaborates, a different pattern begins to form. The groove of a mind that increasingly sees itself move, and in the seeing, recovers the fraction of a second in which something other than the automatic is possible. The mind does not become less reactive through effort alone. Effort directed at suppressing reaction only adds another layer of tension to what is already tense. It becomes less reactive through the accumulated weight of having actually seen itself react, clearly, without drama, enough times that the pattern becomes familiar from the inside, and what is familiar from the inside becomes, with time, possible to meet differently. The building is not random, though. The fuels are not running without direction. Underneath the reaching, the self-protection, the fixed views, something is being guarded. A self, a sense of who we are, what we deserve, how we are supposed to be regarded by the world and the people in it. And the thing the mind works so hard to protect, the tradition has something very precise and unexpected to say about what it actually is, when it is finally looked at directly. To interrupt the building fully, we have to look at what is being guarded, at the self that fires the second arrow, and what the teaching discovered about that self when it was finally examined, honestly and without looking away. "3 months from now, perhaps sooner, the thing that is heaviest in this moment will be something you can mention in passing. Not because it didn't matter, not because you were wrong to feel it, because time will have moved through it. The weight will have changed shape. The urgency that felt like a permanent feature of being alive will have settled into something quieter, a residue, a memory, something that belongs to a version of you that existed in a particular week and does not exist in quite the same form anymore. You already know this is true. You have lived through it before. Things that were once unspeakable became speakable. Things that once felt like they would never stop being the most important fact about your life settled and were eventually replaced by different most important facts. The particular wound that held your full attention for weeks faded into background. Not because you willed it to, not because you resolved anything, but because time and the ongoing weight of living moved through and past it. You know this from inside. You have felt it. What the tradition asked, and this is where the examining begins, is a simpler and stranger question than it first appears. If the wound changes that much, what does that say about the self the wound was happening to? Hold the situation brought forward from before, the one still present somewhere in the body. Now consider this exact wound, with this exact weight, carrying this exact charge. It was not this weight 3 weeks before it happened. 3 weeks before the event, the thing that is now the center of everything was simply not there. And 3 months from now, it will not be quite this shape, this size, this color of urgency. The wound has a lifespan. It arrived. It will pass. It is, even right now, in the middle of being felt most acutely, already slowly changing. Not dissolving. The feeling is real and the feeling is present. But turning, the way everything in experience turns, the way a day turns into evening, without a single decisive moment when the light changes. But here is what the teaching points toward, and it asks for honest looking rather than quick agreement. The self doing the suffering changes with the wound. Not after the wound heals. With it, at the same rate, in the same direction. Think about who you were the night before something painful happened. The version of you that went to sleep without knowing what the next morning held. That person had different preoccupations, different tendernesses, a different center of gravity to their worry. They existed entirely. They were completely real to themselves. and they are now, in an important sense, gone, replaced by the person who woke to find a different reality and who has been living inside that reality since. The wound did not happen to the version of you that will exist 3 months from now. It happened to the version that existed then. And that version has already been changing since the moment it arrived. This is not a comfortable observation. It asks something of the mind that the mind resists giving. The admission that the self doing the suffering is not a fixed and permanent thing that wounds happen to, but something that moves and shifts and is shaped by the wounds themselves. That the wound and the self are not separate objects, one acting on the other, but a single process unfolding together. The tradition was precise about what this feels like from the inside when it is first seen clearly. Not a relief. Not immediately. First, something more like vertigo, the slight dizziness of a fixed landmark shifting. The mind had been working from the assumption of a continuous, stable self at the center of all experience, a self whose history adds up, whose wounds accumulate into something coherent, whose identity is earned and maintained and defended against those who would diminish it, a self solid enough to be worth defending, a self that persists, unchanged in its essential nature, from the child who first learned what it was to be overlooked, to the adult who is lying awake right now, holding the same shape of wound in a different year. To look carefully at that assumption and find it less solid than expected is disorienting before it is freeing. But sit with it a moment longer. In the situation being held, right now, the thing that was hurt, the one who felt the wound, try to find exactly where it lives. The mood right now, as it actually is. Is it the same mood that woke this morning? Has it already shifted since sitting down to listen? The anger that was loud an hour ago, is it at exactly the same pitch now? The grief, does it feel identical to itself from 1 hour to the next? Or does it have waves, internal weather, moments of almost forgetting followed by the remembering again? The wound is not still, and the one who is wounded is not still either. This is what the second arrow is actually defending. Not a fixed and permanent self, but the story of one. A narrative that says, this is who I am. This is what was done to me. This is what that means about my worth and my place and what I deserve. A story coherent enough to feel like a self, maintained with enough consistency to feel permanent, but a story nonetheless, running through a mind that is itself changing as it tells it. And here is the consequence the tradition drew from this. Quietly, without drama, the exhaustion of reactive suffering is partly the exhaustion of trying to hold a story still in a mind that will not hold still. Think about what the multiplication costs. Not just the emotional energy of being in distress, but the specific effort of maintaining a consistent narrative about who was wronged, and how, and what that means, against the constant low pressure of experience moving in directions the narrative didn't predict. A good night's sleep softens the certainty slightly, so the certainty has to be rebuilt each morning. A moment of genuine warmth from the person who hurt you creates a crack in the clean story. So the crack has to be papered over, the warmth reinterpreted, the story restored. New information arrives that complicates the picture, and the multiplication runs to edit the picture back into the shape that serves the narrative. The second arrow carries two distinct kinds of exhaustion. One is the rawness of genuine hurt. The first arrow, real and honest, asking to be felt. The other is the separate effort of maintaining a consistent story around the hurt. The maintenance work of keeping a fixed narrative fixed inside a mind that will not hold still. Keeping that story coherent requires constant effort. The mind is doing two things simultaneously: experiencing the original wound and working to ensure that the experience stays correctly shaped, that the hurt continues to mean what it is supposed to mean, that the self it happened to continues to be the self it is supposed to be. When this is seen clearly, when the watching is direct, immediate, the mind actually observed catching itself mid-maintenance, something begins to ease. Not the wound itself, the maintenance effort. The tradition offered something here that is easy to miss because it sounds like it is asking for something difficult. What the old teachers pointed toward was not the elimination of the self-sense, not the achievement of some state in which the feeling of being a person disappears. They were pointing towards something much more immediate. The recognition that the self-story can be held more lightly than it is currently being held. That the grip does not need to be this tight. That what feels like the structure holding everything together is, on closer inspection, a structure that is itself supported by the grip and loosens when the grip does. Here is what this means in practice, right now, with whatever is still present from before. Take the weight of it, the heaviest version of the feeling, the one that arrives when the thought lands squarely. Now remember that same feeling 2 weeks ago. If this wound is recent, 2 weeks ago it may not yet have existed in this form. If it is older, 2 weeks ago it had a different texture. Different details were prominent. Different aspects of the story were felt most keenly. The same wound, a slightly different shape. Now notice the feeling right now, the texture of it, the weight of it, as specifically as possible, and understand. This version, this exact version, with this specific quality, will not be the version that exists 2 weeks from now. It is already, in this very moment, moving. Not toward resolution necessarily, not toward the relief of being finished, simply moving, changing, becoming the next version of itself, which will become the version after that. The wound has momentum. It is going somewhere, even when it doesn't feel like it, even in the nights when it feels entirely permanent and settled and fixed in place forever. The self that is holding this wound is going somewhere too, is already, right now, the version of itself that is holding this particular weight at this particular hour, and not quite the version that will be holding a slightly different weight at a different hour, with slightly different questions, slightly different certainties about what it all means. To watch this, to actually observe the mind moving, the wound shifting, the certainty softening at its edges, is to feel the grip on the defended story loosen slightly. To stop requiring the wound to hold still in order for the hurt to be valid. To stop requiring the self to be fixed in order for the pain to be real. The pain is real. the self is real enough, and both are moving already in the direction of the person who will exist on the other side of this. The movement is not comfortable to watch. The tradition never claimed it would be. What it claimed, and what the evidence of every mind that has sat honestly with its own reactivity confirms, is that the watching itself is the beginning of relief. The grip loosens in proportion to the seeing, and the movement is what releases the grip, not by force, not by willing the wound away, but by seeing, honestly, that the fortress the multiplication has been defending was never quite as solid as the defending required it to be. And what happens to the second arrow when the fortress is seen clearly? Something changes in the relationship between the mind and its own reactivity. The second arrow does not immediately vanish. Old habits do not dissolve because they have been understood, but the urgency behind the arrow shifts. The fuel for the craving changes. The conceit, the insistence on a particular story about who was wronged and how, loosens 1 degree from its certainty. The fixed views begin to develop, very slowly, a small amount of permeability. The chain still runs. Old grooves do not dissolve overnight, but the chain runs slightly less automatically, with slightly less urgency, because the thing being defended has been seen as something other than a permanent structure, requiring permanent protection. This, the old teachers said, is where real change becomes possible. Not in the resolution of the wound, but in the seeing of the self that holds it, finding, inside the pain, the very movement that the practice points toward. The wound itself, honestly examined, contains its own teaching about impermanence. As observation, the movement is already occurring. The loosening is not something to be achieved. It is something to be noticed, already underway, in the very wound being held. There is one place where the defended self makes itself most audible, where the self-story presses hardest toward expression and demands to be heard. And that is in the moment before something is spoken, in the gap between the impulse to respond and the words that follow. The urge to correct, to justify, to assert, to wound back, to ensure the other person understands what they did. All of this carries the full weight of the defended story. Everything the self requires the other person to know. Everything the multiplication has built and maintained, and is now asking the mouth to deliver. The tradition looked at this moment, the specific moment before speech, with more care than almost any other. What it found there, and the practice it developed in response, cuts to the same root as everything examined here. The defended self pressing outward, the chain reaching toward the world, and offers something as practical as it is precise. The impulse to speak has a body. It is not abstract. It lives somewhere specific. In the tightening of the throat, in the particular pressure behind the sternum, in the way the jaw sets itself before the words have even formed into sentences. You can feel it arriving, the heat of it, the momentum, the sense of something pressing toward the outside world that the whole body is organized around releasing. Sometimes it arrives quickly, the words fully formed before the situation has even finished unfolding. Sometimes it builds slowly, over hours, each return to the memory adding another layer of pressure until the body is so organized around the release that the decision to speak feels less like a choice and more like an inevitability. Hold the situation from before, the one still present somewhere in the body, and locate the impulse there. If the other person were in the room right now, what would the body want to say? Don't form the sentence yet. Find the impulse before the sentence, the pressure of it, where it lives, what it feels like from the inside, in the body, before the words have been organized into the most effective possible shape. This is where Buddhism placed one of its most precise and most practical teachings. Not in what to say, the content of speech is a much later question. Here, in this moment, before the sentence forms, in the gap between the impulse arriving and the mouth opening, in the body of the wanting to speak. The reason Buddhism went here, to the body of the impulse rather than to the rules of speech, is that the body of the impulse tells you everything you need to know about what is about to be spoken. When the impulse comes from the second arrow, from the building, from the fuels of reaching and self-protection and fixed view, it has a particular quality in the body, a formed quality. The words are already organized before the decision to speak has been made. The sentence is ready, complete, rehearsed. The tone is calibrated, pitched to wound just enough, or to force acknowledgement, or to establish a record that the other person cannot deny. There is momentum. The whole body is already leaning toward the release. There is heat in the throat. The jaw is set. Something is gathering itself. You know this quality. You have felt it from the inside, in the moments before you said something you later wished you hadn't, or the moments before you said something that did exactly what it was designed to do, and the doing of it left you feeling worse than before the saying. The quality of that impulse, formed, pressurized, aimed, is recognizable. It has a specific texture in the body, and the texture is always there, available to the attention in the moment before the words go out. The question is whether the attention arrives in time to feel it, or whether the momentum carries the words out before the watching self has had any opportunity to be present to what is happening. Most of the time, the momentum wins. The words go before the attention arrives. The release happens, and then the watching self takes inventory of what went out and what came back, and finds, often, that what came back is harder to carry than what was there before. A response that misread the intent, a defense that widened the gap, a silence worse than argument. And the building adds that too. The aftermath becomes more material for the monument, and the monument grows, and the next impulse to speak is formed from a larger building than the one before. There is a particular quality to the weight that follows speech from the building, different from the weight of the original wound. The original wound was given. This one was made, and the making of it, even when it was entirely understandable, adds its own distinct kind of heaviness to what is already being carried. What the Buddhist teachers pointed toward is a different place for the attention to go in that moment. Into the body of the impulse itself, into the pressure and the heat and the formed quality of what is gathering there. not to analyze it. Analysis takes too long, and by the time it finishes, the words are already out. But simply to be present to it, to feel it clearly for just a moment before deciding whether to release it. This is an almost impossibly subtle shift in the position of attention, and it changes everything. Because when the attention is actually present to the body of the impulse, fully there, feeling the pressure and the heat and the formed shape of what wants to be said, the impulse reveals itself more clearly than it ever does at a distance. Think of the difference between watching a river from a bridge and standing in it. From the bridge, you can see the general shape of the current. Standing in it, you feel every particular pull, every eddy, every place where the force changes direction. The body of the impulse is the same. Observed from a distance, analyzed after the fact, examined in retrospect, it yields general understanding. Felt from inside, in the moment it is running, it yields something the understanding cannot reach. The direct perception of what is actually happening and what it actually needs. Try it right now, with the situation held from before. Not the sentence, not the content of what would be said, the impulse itself, the pressure of it. Notice where it lives in the body. Notice the formed quality, the sense that the words are already organized and waiting. Notice the momentum, the lean toward release. And now feel, from inside that, what the impulse needs from the other person, what it is pressing toward, what would count as success. This is where the distinction the Buddha made about speech becomes felt rather than understood. The Buddha described words worth speaking as timely, true, kind, useful, spoken from goodwill. These were not offered as a checklist to run through before speaking. They were pointing toward a quality of presence in the moment before speech, a quality of knowing, from inside the body of the impulse, what the speaking is actually for. When the impulse is fully present to attention, when the pressure and the heat and the formed quality are clearly felt, something becomes audible from inside it. A question that does not need to be deliberately asked. Is this from the wound or from what the building has made of the wound? The body knows the difference. The impulse that comes from the original wound, from the honest hurt, before the monument, has a different quality in the body than the impulse that comes from the building. The wound's impulse is simpler, less organized. It does not have a prepared sentence waiting. It has something closer to a feeling that has not yet become words, a wanting to be known that has not yet been shaped into the most effective form of delivery. There is less heat in the throat, less momentum, more uncertainty about what the words would even be. This uncertainty is not weakness. It is the honest condition of someone who has not yet organized their hurt into an argument, who is still close enough to the original wound that the words feel inadequate to it. And inadequate words, spoken honestly from that closeness, often reach the other person in a way that fully formed arguments cannot, because they carry the uncertainty with them. And uncertainty, in a difficult conversation, is the thing that creates room for the other person to respond rather than defend. The building's impulse is the opposite, formed, pressurized, aimed. It knows exactly what it wants to say and exactly why. The sentence is ready. The tone is calibrated. The argument is complete. The urgency is very strong. The sense that this must be said now, that delay is loss, that the window is closing. There is a particular quality of rightness to it, the feeling that the words being prepared are the accurate ones, the necessary ones, the ones the situation requires. This feeling of rightness is itself part of the building. The fixed view, the certainty about what happened and what it means, confers on the formed words the quality of truth. They feel true because they confirm the account that has been running. And the feeling of truth, from the inside, is very difficult to distinguish from actual truth. This is why presence in the body of the impulse matters more than confidence in the content of what is formed. From the inside, with full attention present in the body of the impulse, these two feel different, very different. And the difference is always available, not as a concept, but as a physical fact, in the moment before the mouth opens. What the teaching on right speech was pointing toward is not the suppression of one and the permission of the other. It was pointing toward the presence of mind needed to actually feel which one is running, clearly, without deception, and to let what is felt inform what happens next. Sometimes what happens next is speaking. The impulse is examined, and it is from the wound, from the honest, unelaborated hurt, and something is said from there. These words tend to be shorter than the building's words, slower, less certain of themselves. They tend to carry the hurt rather than the argument about the hurt, and they tend to land differently in the other person, because a genuine wound, honestly expressed, reaches something in another person that an argument about a wound cannot reach. The other person can receive a wound. What they cannot receive without defending is a monument. And sometimes what happens next is silence. The impulse is examined, and it is clearly from the building, formed, pressurized, aimed, and the presence of attention in the body of the impulse is enough for the watching self to see that releasing it would add weight rather than reduce it. This silence is not suppression. The building's words are not held back by force. They are simply not released because the attention can see clearly what releasing them would do. The second arrow declines to leave the hand. And the not releasing is not an absence, it is a presence. The watching self, fully arrived, in the moment before speech. The practice builds slowly. The gap before speech is very small, sometimes less than a second, and learning to bring full attention into it is the work of months, not minutes. The building will win many of those moments. The formed sentences will go out before the attention has arrived. This is not failure. It is the condition from which the practice grows. Each time the attention did not arrive in time, the aftermath is itself a teacher. The particular quality of what followed the building's speech, the specific weight of it, is information about what the building produces when left unseen. The watching self can use that information, not as a reason for self-criticism, adding another layer of reactivity on top of what just happened, but as a precise signal about the texture of the building's speech, stored in the body, available for recognition the next time a similar impulse arrives. The aftermath teaches the feeling of having spoken from the building, and once that feeling is known clearly enough from the inside, it begins to be recognizable before the words go out rather than after. And each time the attention does arrive in time, each time the body of the impulse is felt clearly before the words go out, something accumulates. The gap becomes slightly more familiar. The quality of the building's impulse becomes more recognizable from the inside. The distinction between wound and monument becomes more available to perception, and therefore more available to choice. The speech changes. Not all at once. The building does not vacate overnight, but in the direction of words that carry less weight when they land, that require less defense in response, that leave the air between people slightly clearer than they found it. The relationships around the speech change with it, slowly, in the direction of actual contact rather than defended positions meeting defended positions in the dark. This is what the Buddhist teachers meant when they included speech as one of the 8 elements of the path, not as a moral rule about what a good person says or avoids, but as a specific site of practice, a place where the gap between the automatic and the chosen is reliably available every single day, in every conversation that carries any emotional weight. The mouth is where the second arrow most often and most consequentially leaves the hand. And the moment before the mouth opens is where the practice is most immediately available. A lived choice, offered again with every difficult conversation. There is one more layer to this that Buddhism was very direct about. The building is not only trying to speak its way to understanding, it is trying to speak its way to peace, to use the other person's acknowledgement as the key that unlocks the interior weight. The implicit requirement running beneath the impulse, beneath the formed words and the pressurized urgency and the aimed release, is that the other person must acknowledge what happened before the interior can rest. That peace must be given from outside before it becomes available inside. Buddhism looked at this requirement with particular care, at the idea that peace must wait for understanding, that the interior cannot settle until the exterior has acknowledged what happened and found something in it worth examining very closely. What Buddhism found, when it looked closely at that requirement, was a monk who could not rest. His name was Malunkyaputta, and he had a list. Not the ordinary list the mind assembles in the small hours. Tasks undone, words exchanged, things requiring attention before morning. This was a list of questions, 14 of them, arranged with the precision of someone who has been waiting a long time for something to resolve. Is the cosmos eternal or not? Is the world infinite or bounded? Does the self and body constitute one thing or two? Does the awakened one continue after death or not? He had been sitting with these questions long enough that they had become a kind of wall, something standing between him and the practice he was supposed to be doing. He could hear the teaching but could not receive it. The words arrived and bounced back from the surface of the unresolved questions like rain from a roof. He had made a decision. The Buddha would answer them, or he would leave. Peace, as Malunkyaputta understood it, waited on understanding. He could not continue until he knew. The practice itself had become a holding pattern, a waiting room for the answers that had not yet come. He was present in the posture of practice, but absent in the way that matters most, and the absence had the precise shape of 14 unresolved questions. He went to the Buddha and stated his conditions. He believed this was a reasonable thing to ask. The questions were not trivial. They were the kind a serious person assembles over years of sitting with something that will not resolve. A person devoted to a path deserves to know something about where the path leads. Or so it seemed to him, standing there with the full weight of his waiting behind him. The Buddha listened to the full list. Then he asked, "Did I ever promise you these answers? Did you come to me on the condition that I would resolve them?" And then, before Malunkyaputta could answer, he offered an image so precise it has not been improved upon in 25 centuries. Suppose a man is struck by a poisoned arrow. His family rushes to find a physician. The man refuses. He says, "I will not allow this arrow to be removed until I know the name of the man who shot me. Until I know what clan he comes from, what his height is, his complexion, which direction he shot from, what kind of bow was used, what the bowstring was made of, what the shaft is cut from, what feathers are on the arrow, what the arrowhead is made of. All of this must be known first. Then the arrow can be removed." The Buddha paused. Then he said that man would die, Malunkyaputta, before any of those questions were answered. The questions on Malunkyaputta's list were real questions. The Buddha did not dismiss them as foolish or small. He said something more precise. They do not lead to liberation. Knowing whether the cosmos is eternal does not remove suffering. Knowing whether the self survives death does not change how the body tightens when someone speaks unkindly. The questions are real, and they are the wrong ones to die holding. Because holding them, as the condition that must be satisfied before life can be properly lived, is itself a kind of wound. A second arrow shot into the place where the first one already landed. Now bring this closer. The thing the tradition is looking at, the thing Buddhism found worth examining very closely, is not metaphysical. It is the pattern in your own mind tonight. The interior that has been waiting for the exterior to acknowledge what happened before it is allowed to settle. The peace held in reserve behind a condition. Not yet. Not while that thing is still unresolved. Not while the other person has not yet understood. Not while the situation has not yet been explained. Not while the question, the specific, pressing, entirely reasonable question, remains unanswered. Who made that agreement? The Buddha's question to Malunkyaputta was not rhetorical. It was an investigation. Where does the contract live that says peace must wait on understanding? That the interior cannot rest until the exterior has confirmed what happened? That the wound must make sense before the healing is permitted to begin? The contract is real. It functions in the mind with the force of a genuine agreement, and yet it was never signed. It was assembled from experience, incrementally, from the many times relief did follow understanding, from the arguments that did resolve, the apologies that did arrive, the explanations that did come, and the interior that did settle in response. The mind learned this correlation and quietly converted it into a requirement. If relief has tended to follow understanding, understanding becomes the door through which relief is expected to enter. And the mind, having learned to expect the door, stops looking for windows. What the Buddha offered was a window. He pointed at something the monk already knew but had not applied. The arrow can be removed regardless of what is known about the archer. The wound does not require explanation before it is tended to. The body can be treated now. The healing can begin now. And the answers, if they ever come, can come to a person who is no longer bleeding. What changes when the arrow is removed is not the facts of the situation. Those remain exactly as they were. What changes is the quality of the one who will eventually return to those facts and attempt to do something useful with them. A person who has rested carries the weight of a difficult situation differently than a person who spent the night pressing the wound with both hands trying to make it make sense. There is a second story the tradition places alongside this one. It happened in a Simsapa grove, a forest the Buddha was walking through with a group of monks. He bent down and gathered a small handful of leaves from the ground. He held them up and asked, "Which is greater, the leaves in my hand or all the leaves in the forest?" The monks answered without hesitation, "What is in your hand is almost nothing. Teacher, the forest holds vastly more." The Buddha held the leaves a moment longer. Then he said, "Just so. What I have directly known but not taught you is vastly more than what I have taught. Why have I not taught it? Because it does not lead to the goal. Because knowing it will not help you with birth, with aging, with death, with sorrow, with the nature of suffering and its ending. He had chosen what to teach with the precision of a physician who knows which medicines the body can actually use. The mystery was not a gap. The unanswered questions were not an oversight. They were left open deliberately. The deliberateness of a mind that had already understood something the demanding mind resists. More knowing does not mean less suffering. The liberation the tradition points at does not live at the end of more answers. It lives in a different direction entirely. The handful of leaves is not a consolation prize for what the forest still contains. It is precisely sufficient for the journey being made. And the sufficiency is not diminished by the vastness of what was not given. The open question is not a locked door. It is a forest the teaching chose not to enter. And in that choice, a kind of trust that what has been given is enough to carry you through. Listen to how this lands in your own body right now. The mind has its own 14 questions. They are different for every person and nearly identical in function. They are the conditions placed in front of peace, the things that must be known before the interior is given permission to settle. Did what happened mean what I think it meant? Was the slight intentional? Will it be remembered, or forgotten, or repeated? Does the other person understand what they did? Will there be an acknowledgement? Will things be different, or will they simply return to how they were? Will this resolve? And if it resolves, will it resolve in the way that is needed? The list assembles itself in the mind with considerable speed and a feeling of genuine urgency, as if answering it tonight, before sleep, were somehow both possible and necessary. The Buddha's teaching is not that the questions are unimportant. The situation is real. What happened, happened. The relationship matters. The conversation that has not yet taken place matters. None of this is being dismissed. What the tradition is examining, with that particular care the Kula-Malunkyā Sutta describes, is the function the unanswered questions are serving right now. In this room, in this body, in this dark. They are not being held because answering them is possible tonight. They are being held as the condition placed in front of rest. The toll the mind has decided peace must pay before it is allowed to arrive. The arrow can be removed before you know the archer's name. Sit with that for a moment, as a statement about your own interior, not as a metaphor to be intellectually appreciated. The wound you are carrying from today does not need to be explained before it can begin to ease. The tightness in the chest, the replaying mind, the low-frequency hum of something unresolved. All of this can begin to soften right now, before a single question on the list has been answered. The healing does not wait for the understanding. The healing is available now as the prior condition, as the ground from which clarity, if it comes, will eventually rise. This is an observation about how the body actually works when the condition in front of peace is lifted. Even briefly, even incompletely, even with the full knowledge that the questions remain exactly where they were. The mind trained in resolution will resist this. It will say, but the situation is real. It will say, if I let this go, I am saying it did not matter. If I stop holding the question, I am accepting what happened. If I rest before any of this is resolved, I am conceding something I did not want to concede. The tradition has heard all of this. What it offers in response is a clarification. The situation and the night are two different territories. What belongs to the situation belongs to daylight. When the conversation can take place, when the action can be taken, when the words can be found. The night is a body that is tired and a mind that has been running since morning, and a quality of attention genuinely not capable of resolving what the day left open. Holding the question through the night does not bring resolution closer. It costs the resource that resolution will eventually require. The man with the poisoned arrow was not wrong to want to know who shot him. The question was legitimate. What the tradition named with careful attention as an additional suffering was the decision to remain wounded in the meantime. To refuse the treatment that was already present, already available, already prepared, until the mind had received the information it had decided it needed first. The treatment is available right now. Feel the breath for a moment, not as a technique, but as an indicator. How tightly is the chest holding while the question remains open? Notice the quality of that holding, the slight elevation in the jaw, the very faint forward lean of the mind, the sense of being poised at the edge of something that has not yet resolved. That posture is the arrow still in the wound. The physical residue of the condition, not yet, not until. Now let the question stay where it is. In the morning, in the daylight, where it belongs, and let the body be here, not the situation. not the conversation that needs to happen. Just the body in this room, in this particular moment, with a breath that is slower than it was a few sentences ago. The question has not been answered. The situation has not changed. And the chest, if you allow it, is very slightly softer than it was before. That slight softening is not weakness or surrender. It is the body doing what it was always going to do the moment the holding was no longer required of it. There is no decision to be made about whether to trust this. The body does not need permission to release. It was already moving toward ease before the mind thought to let it. That softening is the arrow beginning to be removed. It does not require the archer's name. It does not require the acknowledgement. It does not require a resolution that came, or an apology that arrived, or a conversation that finally produced the understanding the mind has been holding out for. It requires only this: the recognition that right now, in this room, tonight, peace does not owe the mind an answer before it is allowed to enter. The Buddha taught in the Simsapa forest what he could not have taught through 14 resolved questions: that the mystery is not a wound, that the open questions are not a problem awaiting solution, that there is a vast forest of things that will never be known, things that the wisest person who ever lived chose deliberately not to answer, and that in the middle of that vast, unanswered forest, the handful of leaves in the hand is enough. What is known is enough. What is here is enough. The breath, the body, the weight of the limbs against the surface, the quiet of the room. This is enough to rest inside, without any of the questions having been resolved. Let the interior settle now, as though the acknowledgement had already arrived. This is a precise instruction. The interior was waiting for a certain quality of ease it believed could only come from outside, from the other person, from the situation, from the answer. The tradition is pointing at the same quality of ease and locating it somewhere different, in the releasing of the condition itself. The interior that stops waiting for permission settles in the same way, with the same quality of release, as the interior that received the permission it was waiting for. The peace is the same peace. The arrow out is the arrow out. The path to it did not require the archer's name. Feel the particular quality of that settling now. The slight drop of the shoulders, the breath that goes a little deeper than the last one, the very faint loosening behind the sternum. This is the quality the mind has been waiting for the outside world to deliver. It was here the whole time, on the other side of the condition. The unresolved things will still be waiting in the morning, patient and unchanged. What will have changed is the quality from which you meet them, the degree of depletion or steadiness you bring when daylight makes the real work of resolution possible. A mind that rested carries the hard conversation differently than a mind that spent the night clutching the preconditions for its own peace. The tradition named this as a practical fact. The work of resolution is better done by someone who is not still bleeding. The body knows this already. It has been trying to tell the mind for hours. The heaviness in the limbs is the body's own request. The physical argument that the night belongs to rest and the questions belong to another time. The mind, following its training, has been overriding the request. The tradition is simply seconding what the body has already said. The arrow can come out now. The wound can begin to close now. Because resolution and rest were never the same thing. And tonight, in this room, in this body, in this specific quiet, the difference becomes something that can actually be felt. Peace does not wait for understanding. Understanding, when it eventually comes, tends to come to the one who has already rested. And yet beneath even this, beneath the releasing of the condition, beneath the softening of the chest, beneath the first genuine ease of a mind that has stopped demanding answers it cannot reach tonight, there is still the question of what to do with what cannot be avoided. The situations that will not resolve on their own. The pain that is made of something more stubborn than misunderstanding. Reality, in the form it actually arrived, unchanged by sleep or rest or the releasing of any condition. The tradition was not silent about this either, and what it said is worth hearing precisely because it changes the posture from which difficulty is met. The posture Buddhism points toward is not the posture of someone for whom things are easy. This is a clarification the teaching has been building toward, and it is worth stating plainly before anything else is attempted. Everything that has come before tonight, the second arrow, the building, the demand for acknowledgement, the 14 questions held in front of peace, all of it addresses a specific kind of suffering, the suffering that is added to what is real, the story on top of the wound, the monument built from the hurt, the demand that things be different from what they are. The teaching about the second arrow is a precise teaching about that added layer, and it is one of the most useful things early Buddhist teaching ever offered. But it is not the whole of what the Buddha said. And if it is heard as the whole, as the promise that correct practice will make difficulty stop hurting, it becomes something Buddhism never intended, a tool for dismissing genuine pain or for treating the person who is still hurting as someone who has not yet understood correctly. The first thing the Buddha ever taught, the very first of the Four Noble Truths, the opening claim of the entire path, was not a technique. It was not a promise that understanding would remove difficulty. It was a description. Difficulty exists. There is pain built into conditioned existence that does not yield to reframing. A body that is failing will continue to fail even in the presence of equanimity. A loss that has genuinely happened will continue to have happened, regardless of whether the mind builds a monument to it or sets the monument down. The grief that is real will remain the weight it is, even after every second arrow has been returned to the hand that was holding it. The first arrow lands. Buddhism does not say otherwise. What it says is this: within the experience of genuine difficulty, within the weight of the first arrow, already landed, real, there is a specific line. A boundary between two territories that are present in the same moment but are not the same thing. On one side, what you cannot avoid. On the other, what you can. The territory of what you cannot avoid is the fact itself. The thing that actually happened or is actually happening. The physical sensation of pain, real in the body, not requiring interpretation. The fact of loss, someone or something gone in a way that is simply true and does not require the mind to confirm it. The illness that is present, the ending that occurred, the circumstance that arrived through causes and conditions and is now exactly what it is. Also in this territory, the immediate feeling tone of experience, the pleasant or unpleasant quality that arises in the body before the mind has done anything with it. When something genuinely painful has happened, the feeling of pain is not a mistake. It is the accurate response of a sensitive being to what actually occurred. Buddhism does not ask you to stop feeling it. The territory of what you can affect is everything the mind adds to that feeling after it arises. The story assembled from the fact. The demand that the fact be different from what it is. The comparison of this reality to the reality that would have existed if the arrow had not landed. The prediction about everything the wound will continue to cause. The question of why, now, this, to me. The identification of someone to hold responsible. The rehearsal of what would be said if the responsible person were present. The assessment of what this means about the kind of life being lived, or the kind of future that is now foreclosed. None of this was in the first arrow. None of it is required by the fact. The mind adds it, in most cases, before any opportunity to notice that adding is happening, and then it compounds it and refines it and circulates it until what is being experienced is no longer the weight of the first arrow, but the weight of everything the mind has constructed from it. And the construction is always heavier than the arrow. Think of what it is like to carry the two together. The loss is already present. The first arrow, clean and real, and then the mind immediately begins its work. What does this mean? Who is responsible? How could this have been prevented? What will happen now? What is being conceded by not fighting it? Each question adds its own layer. Each layer compounds the one beneath it. And the total weight that arrives at the body by the time the mind has finished building bears very little resemblance to the original wound. What the body is carrying by then is not the event. It is the event plus the months of elaboration the mind has spent on the event. The original arrow is still there, at the bottom of the building, unchanged. But the building, by now, is the larger weight. And the mind, having carried both for long enough, can no longer tell where the arrow ends and the building begins, because they have been fused together for so long that they feel like a single thing. The Pali Canon had a name for this construction process. In the Madhupanika Sutta, a teaching on the mechanics of the reactive mind, the Buddha described what happens in the gap between perception and response. A cascade of mental proliferation he called papanka, meaning conceptual spinning, The way the mind takes what was a single point of contact and weaves it rapidly into a world of interpretation, comparison, demand, and anticipation. Papanka is not deliberate. It is not a choice the mind makes consciously. It is what the habitual mind does automatically in the moment after contact with anything painful, a process that activates before the deliberate self has arrived. The gap between the fact and the papanka is where the entire second arrow lives. The fact arrives, direct, simply what it is, and then immediately, in less time than it takes to form a conscious thought, the mind begins to spin from it. The story begins. The why begins. The assessment of damage begins. And all of it happens so quickly and so naturally that by the time it reaches conscious experience, the person carrying it has the strong impression that what they are holding is the fact itself, when what they are holding is the fact plus everything added to it in the seconds after the fact arrived. Notice this in whatever you are carrying right now. There is something present tonight, the thing that brought you here, the weight that was already in the body before any of these words began. Can you locate anywhere in what you are holding where the fact ends and the story begins? Where the actual wound is and where the papanka, the spinning, the elaboration, the building begins to accumulate around it. The two have a different quality in the body. The fact has a certain density and stillness to it, a presence that does not require the mind to keep it active. Papanka requires energy to sustain. It needs to be recirculated, revisited, rehearsed. The fact simply is. The building must be actively maintained. Sit with whatever is genuinely present right now. The fact itself, not the story built around it. The thing at the bottom of what you are carrying, before the interpretation, before the demand that it be different, before the question of why. What is actually here? If it is grief, the grief itself, not the story about what the loss means or what it forecloses. If it is physical pain, the sensation itself, located precisely in the body, without the prediction about how long it will last or what it signals about the future. If it is difficulty in a relationship, the actual hurt, not the monument built from the hurt. Just the fact as it actually arrived, stripped, as far as is possible tonight, of everything added since. Notice what this is like. The first arrow, met directly, is often both harder and lighter than the full construction. Harder because there is no story to soften it, no narrative of meaning, no reason why, no trajectory that makes it part of something larger. And lighter because it does not carry the additional weight of everything the mind built from it. The demand, the building, the monument, the circulation. The first arrow, met as itself, has a certain clean weight to it. It does not need to be carried forward into every thought and every hour. It simply hurts. Here, in this moment, in the body. And the body was built to hold the first arrow. What the body cannot indefinitely hold is the first arrow plus the full accumulation of everything added to it. the body registers the difference between the two, in the tension, the held breath, the quality of the chest, every moment that the construction is running. The attention just needs to arrive in time to feel the signal. The mind will drift back toward the story. It will drift there immediately and repeatedly, and with a feeling of urgency that makes the return seem necessary. Papanka does not accept being set down without protest. A thought will arise that seems to require engagement right now, a new angle on the question, a detail that had not been considered, a potential resolution that might be reached if only the mind returns to the story one more time. The urgency will feel genuine, and the pull will be strong, and in most cases the mind will follow it before the noticing has had a chance to arrive. This is the condition of practice, not a failure of it. The noticing comes later, after the drift has already happened. And the practice is simply to notice, each time, that the return to the story has occurred, and to come back, gently, to the fact itself, the first arrow, the actual weight, the thing the body can hold without the monument. Buddhism's name for the posture that can be present with genuine difficulty without being consumed by it is upekkha, equanimity, one of the four qualities the Theravada teachers considered foundations of genuine compassion. The word carries in its root the sense of seeing clearly from a position of steadiness, the quality of a mind that is fully present with what is difficult and has not been swept away by it. The Buddha described it this way: neither pushing away nor pulling toward. The mind that encounters the first arrow, real and present, and neither tries to force it into absence through will, nor reaches into it and deepens it through papanka. The mind that can simply be with what is. The old teachers were careful to distinguish this from the cold distance that stops caring. Indifference requires absence. Upekkha requires a quality of presence that is more demanding than reactivity, because it asks the mind to be fully there, with the full weight of what is genuinely difficult, without the escape routes of story or demand. To feel the grief as grief, clearly, without converting it into something the mind can manage at a distance by building from it. To feel the difficulty as the precise difficulty it actually is, no heavier than the fact, but no lighter either, with none of the false relief the monument sometimes appears to offer. This is not a comfortable practice. It is a precise one. The building always has an argument at its center. The equanimous presence has only what is actually here. Feel the difference in the body right now. The quality of holding the full construction, the first arrow plus everything added to it, has a particular texture, a tightness that extends outward from the fact into everything around it, a sense of the mind organized around the wound in a way that leaves very little room for anything else. The direct presence with the fact itself has a different quality, heavy where it is heavy, but with boundaries. The grief sits in a particular place in the chest. The difficulty is a specific thing, with a specific weight, in a specific part of the body. It does not fill the whole room the way the construction does. Meeting it directly, with the quality of neither pushing away nor pulling toward, creates a space around the fact that the construction had consumed Sit for a moment inside that space. The body, in this room, in this specific quiet, with the full weight of the first arrow present and the building set down as far as it will go tonight. The breath moving through a chest that is heavier than it would be if nothing difficult had happened, and lighter than it has been all evening, because the monument is not being held right now. Both things are true at once. The grief is real, and the holding is lighter. The loss is unchanged, and the body has a little more room. This is what the Buddhist path was pointing at. The quality of presence that can hold the first arrow without the building, and in doing so, discovers that the arrow alone was always something the body could carry. The practice is always this specific, a moment-by-moment noticing of which territory the mind is in. First arrow or second arrow, the fact itself or the story built from the fact, the weight of what actually arrived or the weight of everything added since. The noticing does not require the second arrow to disappear. Papanka will continue to activate. The mind will continue to spin, because this is what the untrained mind does, and training is a matter of years, not evenings. The practice is to notice, as often as possible, when the spinning has begun, and to return, gently, to the fact itself. The first arrow, the actual weight, the thing the body can hold without the monument. This returning is not a performance of equanimity. It is the practice of it. The distinction matters because it is easy to perform the words of acceptance while maintaining an internal posture of suppression. To say that one has let go while pressing something very tightly against the floor. What the Buddhist teachers were pointing at is something different. A quality of genuine willingness to be with the fact, to let the grief be the grief in the body, without immediately converting it into material for the building. To let the difficulty be exactly as difficult as it actually is, not 1 degree more difficult because of the added story. And each time the attention returns from the story to the fact, each time the mind comes back from the spinning to the clean weight of the actual wound, something accumulates. A slightly greater familiarity with the feel of the first arrow on its own. A slightly earlier recognition of when the papanka has begun. The gap between drift and noticing shrinks, slowly, across years of this particular kind of attention. What happens in the specific quiet of tonight is not resolution. The first arrow does not come out because equanimity is practiced. The loss remains the loss. The body remains the body. The circumstance remains what it arrived as. What changes is only this. The mind is present with what is actually here, rather than with the monument assembled from what is here. And from that quality of clear presence, from the posture of neither pushing away nor pulling toward, something becomes possible that was not available from inside the construction. The thing that could not be changed is seen clearly for what it actually is. And the thing that could be changed, the next action, the next word, the next choice in a genuinely difficult circumstance, becomes visible as a choice, available, rather than as an inevitability driven by the building. This is the ground Buddhism was preparing across 2,500 years of practice. The posture it was building toward is not the posture of someone who no longer feels pain. It is the posture of someone who can feel the exact weight of what is real, without the monument, without the second arrow, without the demand that things be otherwise, and from that clear seeing, act. The question of how to act from this ground, how to move into a difficult situation without the reactive machinery driving what happens next, is the question the old teachers addressed with the same precision they brought to everything else. They called this right effort, and what they taught is not a teaching about feeling differently. It is a teaching about what to do and when and from what quality of awareness, so that action and reaction are finally two different things. The distinction lands differently in the body at different moments of a day. There are moments when the response comes from somewhere close to the wound, formed, pressurized, fully loaded before the mouth has opened. And there are moments, rarer, harder to describe, when something moves from a quieter place. When the word that arrives is simpler than the one that was rehearsed. When the action has a directness to it, without the additional weight of everything built up around the situation. When what happens next feels less like a release of pressure and more like a step, purposeful, grounded, leaving the air between people slightly clearer than it was before. Most people know both qualities from the inside. The reactive response and the clear one. The buildings move and the move from steadiness. They feel genuinely different. Different in the moment before they happen. Different in the quality of what follows. Different in the way the body carries them for hours afterward. The reactive response has a particular texture, a gathering urgency, a momentum that was already running before the decision was consciously made. There is something almost mechanical about it, the feeling of a process completing itself that began several seconds earlier, in some chamber of the mind the person was not attending to. The clear response has a quality of stillness at its center, the stillness of someone who has arrived at the fact before the building has, and from that arrival, chooses what happens next. Less like detonation and more like placement. Less like something escaping and more like something offered. The Buddha gave a name to the quality of effort that produces the second kind of response. He called it samavayama, right effort, one of the 8 elements of the path he laid out in the deer park at Isipatana on the night he first taught. The word right in this context is not a moral judgment. It is a calibration, the kind of effort that moves in the right direction, at the right intensity, toward the right result. It is the effort that understands what it is actually doing, as distinct from the effort that is simply doing more of what has not worked. And understanding what that means requires first understanding what it is not. When most people think about effort in relation to difficulty, the image that arises is one of force. Pressing, bearing down. The white knuckle approach, jaw set, mind clenching around the problem, effort understood as the quantity of pressure applied to what is resisted. This is the effort of suppression wearing the clothes of practice. It does not release the second arrow. It holds the second arrow very tightly and calls the holding progress. The reactive momentum is still running underneath, intact, simply being overridden rather than transformed. And overriding costs. It costs attention, it costs energy, and it costs the capacity for genuine presence, because the mind is occupied with holding something down rather than actually meeting what is here. A person suppressing is also a person performing equanimity for themselves or for others, and the performance requires a split in awareness that leaves very little room for the clear seeing the Buddha was actually pointing at. A monk named Sona came to the Buddha with exactly this problem. He had been meditating with ferocious intensity, walking meditation for so many hours each day that the skin on the soles of his feet had split open and bled. The ground around his walking path, the texts say, was stained red. He was applying everything he had, without reservation, without rest. He was grinding with the total commitment of someone who believes that liberation is on the other side of maximum effort, that the path rewards the one who presses hardest. And the more he applied, the less anything opened. The effort felt total and the result felt absent. He was beginning to wonder whether the path worked at all, or whether something in him was simply incapable of walking it. There is a particular quality to that kind of exhaustion, the exhaustion of someone who has been working with maximum sincerity and minimum result. It is not lazy exhaustion. It is not the tiredness of someone who held back. It is the tiredness of someone who gave everything they had in the wrong direction, and who now faces the most difficult question the path can ask. What if the effort itself was the problem? What if the quality of what was being applied was misaligned, not the quantity? What if the string had been tuned so tight for so long that the practitioner could no longer hear whether it was playing or simply straining? Sona was sitting with that question when the Buddha came to him. The Buddha sat with him. He asked about the path, about the practice, about how Sona was working. And then he asked a question that had nothing to do with meditation at all. Before you became a monk, you were a musician. You played the veena, a stringed instrument. When the string was tuned too tight, what happened? Sona said, it broke or played sharp and out of tune. And when it was too slack, it would not sound at all. The Buddha said, and when it was tuned to exactly the right tension, neither too tight nor too slack, what then? Then, said Sona, it played. The Buddha did not need to extend the comparison. Sona understood it the moment the question landed. He had been tuning the string too tight for months, pressing the practice until it broke, or until it played so sharp that nothing of genuine value could be heard. The answer was not to relax the string into slack absence. The answer was the precise middle, the tension that allows sound without forcing it, the effort that is present without being clenched. This calibration, the skill of knowing from inside the effort how tightly the string is drawn, is the thing discovered only through practice, never through instruction alone. It lives in the body before it lives in the understanding. It is always in relationship to the particular person, the particular difficulty, the particular moment. But once it has been felt once the mind has found the tension that neither breaks nor goes slack, it becomes recognizable, not as an idea, as a felt register, a quality the body knows before the mind has named it. And recognizable means returnable to. This is the texture of right effort, not the grinding force of suppression, but the precise engagement of a mind that is fully present without being clenched, active without being urgent, steady without being absent. The quality that can look at the second arrow clearly and choose not to release it, without the choosing itself becoming another form of building. In the Anguttara Nikaya, the Buddha laid out what right effort actually does in practice. 4 specific moves the mind makes, each one precise and distinct. The first, preventing harmful states from arising when they have not yet arisen. The second, releasing harmful states that have already arisen. The third, cultivating helpful states that have not yet arisen. The fourth, maintaining and deepening helpful states that are already present. Heard as a list, these can sound like management instructions. Felt as practice, each one names a recognizable movement the mind makes in real time. A movement that is available in any moment. The attention arrives early enough to use it. The first move, preventing, is what happens in the half second before the habitual response fires. The situation arrives. The familiar pattern begins to load. The words form, the tension gathers, the building begins its assembly. Prevention is the quality of attention that arrives in that half second and simply sees the pattern before it completes. Sees the papanka, the mind's elaborating construction, before it convinces the mind that it is the fact. This is the most valuable move and the hardest to make, because the gap is tiny and the pattern is fast, and the habitual mind rarely waits for the watching self to arrive. But it grows. The gap widens with practice. The watching self begins to arrive earlier. Not always, but measurably earlier than before, across months and years of this particular kind of attention. The second move, releasing, is what happens when prevention did not arrive in time. The reactive state is already running. The building is already underway. Releasing is not forcing the state to stop. It is withdrawing the attention that has been sustaining it. Papanka requires active recirculation to maintain. When attention stops feeding it, when the mind returns, gently, to the fact of the first arrow rather than the monument built from it, the spinning begins to slow. Not immediately, not completely, and not without protest from the part of the mind that believes the spinning is productive. But it slows. The weight shifts. The body notices the shift before the mind does. In the slight softening of the jaw, the breath that arrives a little more fully than the last one, the shoulders dropping a fraction of an inch toward where the floor actually is. The third and fourth moves, cultivating and maintaining, are what happens in the space that opens when the first two are applied. When the building is not being actively fed and the first arrow is being met directly, the quality of equanimous presence, upekkha, the evenness that neither pushes away nor pulls toward, has room to arise. Cultivating is the gentle encouragement of that quality, recognizing it when it appears and not immediately abandoning it for the next compelling thought. It is a form of hospitality toward the mind's steadier registers, a willingness to stay with what is quiet long enough to learn what quiet actually contains. Maintaining is the longer work, returning to this quality across the hours of a difficult day or a difficult night until it becomes less an achievement and more a direction the mind knows how to face. A direction that, with enough returning, begins to feel less like arriving at something and more like remembering something that was always there. The practitioners who reported the deepest shift were not the ones who had one powerful breakthrough. They were the ones who had returned to this quality so many times that the returning itself had become easy. Feel where these moves are available in this moment. Whatever is present in the body tonight, the weight that has been here since before these words began, is there a quality of spinning around it? A recirculation? A part of the mind that is actively feeding the monument? If so, that is where the releasing move applies. A gentle withdrawal of the attention that has been sustaining the spinning, back to the fact itself. The first arrow, clean and real, without the structure built around it. And in the space that opens when the structure is not being held, however briefly, however incompletely, notice what quality of presence becomes possible. The breath more fully felt than it was a moment ago. The weight of the limbs against the surface. The sound of wherever you are. The particular quiet of this particular night. The temperature of the air. The specific texture of this moment before sleep. The fact of being here, alive, in this room, at this moment, with this specific weight, and with a mind that has arrived at the fact before the building has. This quality of presence, available, steady, meeting what is here without either forcing it away or deepening it, is what the Buddhist path calls the fruit of right effort. The string at the right tension. Sounding. The practical weight of this is most visible in moments of genuine difficulty. The hard conversation that will not be avoided forever. The situation that requires a response. A real response, not more waiting, in the presence of emotions that are real and valid and still running. What right effort offers in those moments is not the absence of feeling. The first arrow is still there. The hurt is still present. What has changed is the quality from which the response forms. The building is not driving what happens next. The fact is, a mind carrying only the first arrow, the fact itself, without the monument, approaches a hard conversation differently than a mind carrying the fact plus everything built from it. The words it finds are simpler, closer to the original wound and farther from the argument constructed around it. They carry the honest weight of what actually happened, rather than the elaborated weight of what the building has made of it. And something in the other person tends to receive that differently. A genuine wound, honestly carried and honestly expressed, reaches something in another person that a monument cannot reach. The other person can meet a wound. What they cannot meet without defending is a monument arriving as though it were a wound. They can feel the difference. Something in them registers the monument before the words have finished landing, and the architecture of their own defense assembles quietly in answer. There is something the Theravada teachers noticed across centuries of working with practitioners in genuine difficulty. People navigating grief, illness, betrayal, the long aftermath of events that did not resolve cleanly. They noticed that the ones who suffered most were rarely suffering from the wound itself. They were suffering from what the mind had built from the wound. The monument, the accumulated meaning, the story held so long it had calcified into something that felt permanent. And they noticed that right effort, the calibrated effort of returning, again and again, to the fact rather than the monument, was the move that changed this. Not by eliminating the wound, not by making the difficulty smaller than it was, but by meeting it at its actual size, without the additional structure the mind had placed around it, and finding, in that meeting, that what was actually there was bearable in a way the monument had never been. The lute string does not force the sound. It is simply at the right tension, and in that precision, music becomes possible that was not possible at either extreme. The mind at the right tension is the same, present with what is difficult, engaged without urgency, capable of moving into what is genuinely hard without adding the weight of everything the building has made from it. The effort is real. The engagement is full. The string is drawn, and the quality of what sounds from that drawing is something neither suppression nor avoidance could ever produce. And yet right effort, precisely calibrated and genuinely present, is still an active engagement with difficulty. It still meets the situation. It still responds. It still carries the weight of the first arrow and moves with that weight into the world. What the old teachers named beyond this, what they pointed at as the quality that makes right effort sustainable across a lifetime of genuine difficulty, is something subtler than effort. Something that holds both the difficulty and the one who is practicing together without grasping at the one or fleeing from the other. They called it love without grasping, and it is one of the most misunderstood teachings in all of Buddhism because it sounds like warmth and is in fact a precise description of freedom. The phrase arrives like a paradox. Love is warmth, reaching, the pull toward another. Grasping is the word used for something the hand does when it is afraid of losing. So love without grasping sounds, at first encounter, like love with the essential part removed, like compassion that has cooled into politeness, or care that has learned to keep a safer distance. It sounds like the advice someone gives when they want to sound wise. Be loving, but do not feel too much. present, but do not let what happens to the people you love land too heavily. Keep a little space between yourself and what matters to you, and call that space peace. This misreading is so common that the Theravada teachers specifically named it. They called it the near enemy of equanimity. Near, because it resembles the real thing closely enough to be mistaken for it. The near enemy of love without grasping is indifference wearing the clothes of wisdom. It has the same outward stillness. It produces the same lack of visible disturbance. But the person inside it knows the difference. Indifference is cold at its center. It is a withdrawal, a managed distance, a decision not to be affected rather than a ground from which being affected is safe. The quality the Buddha was pointing at is warm at its center, fully present, available to be moved. The teachers also named the far enemy, the opposite extreme, equally far from genuine upekkha. The far enemy of equanimity is grasping grief, anxious attachment that needs everything to remain the same, and is therefore in a constant low-grade state of distress because nothing ever remains the same. Near enemy on one side, the coldness that withdraws from caring. Far enemy on the other, the fever of needing what is loved to be permanent. Genuine upekkha is neither. It is the quality that can care completely and hold with open hands, present with the love and present with the impermanence, without needing to resolve the tension between them. What the early Buddhist teachings were actually describing was a quality of heart that can love fully and hold what it loves with open hands. These teachings spoke of 4 qualities: the Brahma Viharas, sometimes translated as the divine abodes or the immeasurable hearts, not a list of aspirations, a description of what the heart is capable of when it has found its own depth. Metta, goodwill, the unconditional wishing of well-being for another. Not the warmth that says, I want you to be happy because your happiness makes me feel secure, but the quality that wishes the person well even in their difficulty, even in their distance, even in the versions of their life that bear no relation to your own. Karuna, compassion, the capacity to be present with another's suffering without fleeing or fixing. The ability to remain in the room with pain, to let it land, to be genuinely affected, without either withdrawing or being swept away by it. Mudita, sympathetic joy, the genuine pleasure taken in another's happiness, uncontaminated by the small voice that measures their joy against your own situation and finds the comparison uncomfortable. And upekkha, equanimity, the ground that makes the other 3 sustainable. These 4 were not presented as separate options, one of which the practitioner might prefer and develop in isolation. They were described as a single field, 4 qualities that arise together when the heart has found its proper balance. Upekkha is not the absence of the other 3. It is the quality that prevents the other 3 from collapsing under their own weight. Metta without upekkha becomes sentimental attachment. Love that says I care about you and therefore you must remain as you are, and if you change or leave, something in me will break. Karuna without upekkha becomes overwhelm. The practitioner who absorbs the suffering of everyone they encounter until they can no longer function, until the compassion collapses into the withdrawal that exhaustion requires. Mudita without upekkha becomes conditional, joy in another's good fortune that secretly depends on the other person's fortune remaining recognizable from where you are standing. Upekkha is what allows the other three to remain open, because it is the quality that holds all of this without needing any of it to be different from what it is. Buddhaghosa, the 5th century Theravada scholar who systematized centuries of practice teaching in the Visuddhimagga, described upekkha with a precision that has not been bettered. It is the quality of looking on with equanimity, meaning looking on fully, with complete presence, without turning away, while remaining internally undisturbed. The key word is undisturbed, not unmoved. A person with upekkha can be moved, can be touched by what is beautiful, pained by what is genuinely painful, affected by what is affecting. What they cannot be is swept away. The ground beneath the movement remains. The surface of the water can show the weather, and the depth below remains still. To understand what grasping actually is, it helps to feel where it lives in the body. It lives in the chest, in the particular quality of tightness that arises when something we love is threatened with change. When the person we care about is in pain and we cannot fix it. When the relationship that has mattered most begins to shift. When the child we raised starts to become a person with their own direction, one that will inevitably lead them away from us. The tightness is not the love itself. It is the love's fear of ending, the additional thing the love is carrying, the demand placed on what is loved to remain the way it is. The Pali word for this is upadana, clinging or fuel. What the mind clings to, it feeds. What it feeds, it must eventually watch consume itself, because all things that burn eventually end. The love itself is not the problem. It is the upadana in the love, the clinging part, the part that has attached conditions to the love that the beloved can never fully satisfy, that creates the particular suffering of intimate relationships. A practitioner holding with open hands does not love less. The love can actually be felt more directly, because it is no longer filtered through the anxiety of losing it. What changes is the quality of presence within the love. Less auditing, less secretly monitoring the other person for signs of change, less performing the love in ways designed to secure its continuation. More simply being with the person as they are, today, in this moment, without the weight of needing them to be here tomorrow in exactly the same way. What grasping costs, early Buddhist teaching was specific about. It does not just create suffering for the one who grasps. It creates a particular burden for the one who is grasped at. To be loved by someone who cannot imagine losing you is to carry their fear alongside your own life. It is a weight the beloved did not ask for and cannot set down without guilt. The love is real. The care is genuine. But wrapped inside it is a demand. Please do not change. Please do not become something I do not recognize. Please do not leave. and that demand cannot be met because people change, because things end, because the impermanence the Buddha named in the first week of his teaching is not a philosophical position. It is simply what is true. This shows up not only in the dramatic moments of loss, but in the quiet friction of ordinary days. The friend who said something that landed in the wrong place and has not acknowledged it. The partner whose attention has been elsewhere for weeks. The colleague who was recognized for work that was partly yours. In each of these moments, the grasping response is the same. A tightening around the situation, a demand placed on the other person to behave differently, a quiet audit of whether the love or the respect is still intact. The exhaustion of intimate life often comes from this auditing, the continuous, low-level effort of checking whether the things that matter are still in place. Upekkha does not eliminate the noticing. It changes what happens after the noticing, the gentle return to the fact itself, without the monument built from it, again and again, across the ordinary days of a life. The weight of this becomes most clear when someone sits with a person who is dying. The practitioner who grasps is present in the room, but also in a desperate negotiation somewhere behind the eyes, reaching, bargaining, constructing the version of this moment in which the ending does not arrive. The person in the bed can feel that reaching. It asks something of them they are no longer able to give. The reassurance that the person who loves them will be all right. The practitioner who has found upekkha is simply there, present with what is, holding the hand, not requiring the dying person to manage the weight of being loved. The love is identical in intensity. What is different is where it is coming from, and the dying person, who can feel both qualities, can rest more fully in the second. When loss comes, as it must, in every life, grasping doubles the weight of it. The natural grief of losing something that mattered is already real and large and requires nothing added to it. It asks to be received, sat with, moved through at its own pace. But grasping adds the second arrow, the constructed monument of how it should have been different, the recirculation of all the moments that could have been said or held or fixed before the loss arrived, the ongoing production of a grief that extends the wound indefinitely into a future that will never contain the thing that was lost. The Pali Canon did not suggest that love should prevent grief. It suggested that grief born cleanly, grief that meets the wound directly, without the monument, has a different quality. It moves differently. It changes the person who carries it differently. It arrives at a place the grasping grief cannot reach, the place where loss has been fully received, and life continues around it, carrying what was loved forward as part of what this particular human life has been. The Theravada teachers described the Buddha's own equanimity this way. He felt the suffering of every being he encountered, and he remained undisturbed. The teachers were careful to explain what this meant. It did not mean he felt nothing. The texts show him moved by the deaths of close students, present with the grief of parents who had lost children, remaining in full contact with the reality of suffering around him throughout his life. What the teachers meant by undisturbed was that the ground beneath the feeling did not move. That what he encountered did not alter his capacity to remain present, to see clearly, to continue responding with the quality of attention that each person in front of him required. The feeling passed through him fully, and he remained. Feel what is being described. Bring to mind something you love, a person, a relationship, a version of your own life that you are holding carefully. Notice where in the body the holding lives, the quality of the chest around it, the slight tension at the thought of it changing, of it becoming other than what it is. That tension, the grip beneath the love, is the upadana, not the love itself, the fear inside the love. See if it is possible to separate them, even just in the awareness, not in the feeling itself. Here is the love. Here is the fear of losing the love. Two different things, occupying the same space in the chest, so long fused together that distinguishing them feels almost impossible. The love wants to reach. The fear wants to hold. They have been doing these two things simultaneously for so long that the reaching and the holding feel like the same act. Buddhism says they are not. The practice is learning to feel the difference, not in order to eliminate the fear, but so that the fear no longer directs the love. Now, without moving away from what you love, without reducing the care, notice what it would feel like to release the grip slightly. Not to stop loving, not to become indifferent, simply to stop demanding inside the love that the thing loved remain unchanged forever. To hold it with open hands instead of a closed fist. The love is still there, and there is something lighter in the chest around it. A quality of offering rather than holding. The warmth does not diminish. The care does not pull back. What changes is the weight of the fear inside it, and in that lightening, the love itself becomes easier to carry, easier to offer, and easier for the other person to receive. What the practitioners in the Theravada lineage reported across centuries of this practice was that this distinction did not arrive all at once. It arrived gradually, first in the smaller griefs, then in the larger ones. First in the ordinary friction of daily relationships, then in the moments of genuine loss. The practice was not a technique applied once and completed. It was a direction returned to, the same way the releasing move applies in any difficult moment, again and again, until the returning becomes a reflex rather than a decision. The heart learns, over time, that open hands hold more than closed ones, not because they prevent loss, but because they make the love itself more fully present, more available, more real to the person who is being loved. This quality, the warmth of metta held within the groundedness of upekkha, is what early Buddhist teaching called the immeasurable. It is called immeasurable because it does not run out. The love that grasps has an internal economy. It is vulnerable to depletion, to disappointment, to the exhaustion that comes from needing the beloved to be other than they are. The love that holds with open hands has no such economy. It is not rationed by outcome. It does not need the other person to remain unchanged in order to continue. It can wish well from across a distance. It can wish well in the presence of grief. It can wish well even when what is wished for does not arrive, because it is not dependent on arrival for its own continuation. The Karunaya Metta Sutta, one of the oldest surviving texts in the Pali Canon, uses the image of a mother and her only child, as a mother would protect her child with her own life. So let the practitioner cultivate boundless goodwill toward all beings. The image is significant precisely because a mother's love for a child is one of the most visceral forms of grasping love that human beings experience, and the text does not suggest removing the intensity or the depth of that love. It suggests removing the grasping from it and extending what remains to everyone. The love that is willing to give everything without demanding anything in return. The love that wishes the child well in all the versions of a life the mother will never see. The love that can say, "I wish you well, wherever this takes you," and mean it completely, without reservation, without the small grief of wishing it were otherwise. This is what the old teachers meant when they said, "Love without grasping is a description of freedom." It is not freedom from love. It is freedom within love, the freedom that comes when the love no longer carries the weight of its own fear of ending. When it can be fully present with another person without secretly auditing the relationship for signs of change. When it can sit with someone in their worst hours and offer presence rather than rescue, because it is no longer frightened of what their suffering means about the permanence of things. The ground below the love is steady. The love itself can move fully. Both things are true at the same time, and that is not a contradiction. That is the resolution of the paradox this section opened with. And it is this, the stillness of the ground beneath the movement, that Buddhist teachers across many centuries kept returning to as the quality that makes everything else possible. Not stillness as the absence of life, or as a retreat from what is difficult. Stillness as the surface of a pool that is deep enough not to be disturbed by what lands on it, that can receive the weather of a whole day and still reflect the sky clearly at dusk. Ajahn Chah, a 20th century Thai forest teacher working in the Theravada lineage, called it the still forest pool, the mind that has found its natural depth, in which everything is visible, nothing is avoided, and the surface remains clear enough to see all the way to the bottom. It is in this quality, the precise quality that has been moving toward us through everything this teaching has covered, that the path the Buddha laid out finds its deepest expression. The surface of the water is not still because nothing is happening. Wind moves across it. Light changes on it. Leaves land. Small creatures disturb the edge. The weather of an entire afternoon passes across the surface of a forest pool in constant motion, and the depth below remains undisturbed. This is not the stillness of emptiness. It is the stillness of depth, depth sufficient that what moves across the surface cannot reach what is below, The pool reflects the sky clearly, not because the sky is static, but because the pool is deep enough to hold the reflection without being moved by it. The stillness and the receiving are not opposites. They are the same thing, the depth that makes full receiving possible, and the full receiving that makes depth visible. Ajahn Chah, the 20th century Thai forest teacher who gave this image its most precise expression, was not describing a special state that a practitioner achieves after years of dedicated work. He was describing what the mind actually is, underneath everything that has been placed on top of it. He called it the natural mind, chitta in the Pali language, the awareness that is present before the building starts, and that remains present through all the building, and that will remain present when the building stops. The still forest pool is not something constructed through meditation. It is something recognized, a quality the mind discovers when it turns its attention toward what has always been here, rather than toward the production of something new. And that distinction matters, because it changes entirely the quality of the reaching toward it. Construction is exhausting. Recognition is simply attention pointed in the right direction, inward and downward, toward what has always been present. Ajahn Chah taught in the forests of northeast Thailand, in a lineage stretching back through the Thai forest tradition to some of the earliest practice communities outside India. He taught students who came from all over the world, Western practitioners, Thai monks, lay people carrying the particular exhaustion of ordinary life, and he gave them all the same teaching in different forms. He would take students to the edge of a forest pool and ask them to watch the water settle after he had stirred it with a stick. Then he would ask, "Did you make the water still? Or did you allow the stillness that was already there to become apparent?" The practice, he said, is the second one. It has always been the second one. The students who grasped this really grasped it in the body rather than the understanding, found that the entire effort of meditation shifted under them, from striving toward a distant destination to arriving at something already present, from construction to recognition. Most people who have tried meditation have tried it the wrong way first. They sat down, closed their eyes, and attempted to make the mind go quiet. They tried to stop the thinking, to hold the thoughts still, to produce the blank, serene emptiness they had been told was on the other side of sufficient effort. The thoughts did not comply. The thoughts did what thoughts always do, proliferated, accelerated, introduced subjects that had nothing to do with the meditation and everything to do with whatever was most unresolved in the practitioner's life. And the practitioner concluded one of two things. Either they were doing it wrong, or meditation does not work for them specifically. Both conclusions were understandable. Both were also based on a misunderstanding of what stillness actually is. Stillness is not the absence of thought. It is the quality of the awareness that is receiving the thought, a quality that does not change whether there are many thoughts or few, whether the mind is busy or quiet, whether the sitting feels like progress or like failure. The still forest pool is not a blank pool. A blank pool is a pool that has been covered over, something placed on the surface to prevent anything from landing. A blank pool cannot reflect the sky, cannot show the depth, cannot serve any of the purposes a pool serves. What the forest pool does is the opposite. It is maximally open to everything that lands and maximally unaffected in its depth by what lands. Thoughts can arise, and in the forest pool, they are simply seen. Feelings can move, and they are seen. The reactive impulse can fire, the second arrow can form, the building can begin its assembly. And the depth of the pool sees all of this, without being moved by any of it. This is what the Theravada teachers meant when they described the mind that has found its natural depth. Not the mind that has stopped thinking, but the mind whose depth can no longer be disturbed by what passes across the surface. The Buddha described this quality in the Samannaphala Sutta, a sutta in which he used the image of a forest lake fed by a cool spring, its water clear and clean all the way to the bottom. He said that a practitioner who has found this quality of concentrated stillness, samadhi, in the Pali language, can see into the nature of things the way a person can see to the bottom of a clear lake. The muddy lake shows nothing. You can look into it and see only your own reflection obscured by the disturbance of the water. The clear lake shows everything: the stones at the bottom, the creatures moving in the middle depth, the light patterns that shift and settle as the surface moves. Clear seeing requires clear water, and clear water requires a depth that is not constantly being churned from below. The teaching that preceded this image in the sutta was a teaching on releasing the 5 hindrances: desire, ill will, sloth, restlessness, and doubt. And the Buddha described their release as though describing a debt being cleared, a disease being cured, a prisoner being freed. What remains when they lift, he said, is clarity, the natural clarity of a mind that was always capable of clear seeing once the disturbances that were obscuring it had settled. This is what distinguishes the stillness of the forest pool from the stillness of suppression. Suppression is the stirring of muddy water followed by the forced holding of it still, applying pressure to the surface to prevent ripples, holding the breath to prevent movement, gripping the situation tightly enough that nothing can escape or arrive. For as long as the grip is maintained, the surface is smooth, but the water is still muddy. Visibility is still zero. And the moment the grip relaxes, the moment the jaw unclenches or the breath returns, the mud swirls again, and the disturbance picks up exactly where it left off. Suppression produces a performance of stillness over a genuinely disturbed interior. The forest pool produces actual stillness, depth, clarity, the capacity to see all the way to the bottom even while the surface is moving. The difference between them is the difference between holding your breath and breathing slowly. One is sustainable indefinitely. The other can only last until the breath is needed. What has been running through this whole teaching, the first arrow and the second, the papanka and the monument, the reactive response and the clear one, the grasping love and the open-handed love, is all, at its core, a description of the difference between the muddy lake and the clear one. The reactive mind is shallow. When something lands on its surface, the disturbance reaches all the way to the bottom, and then churns back up again and keeps churning because there is no depth to absorb and settle the movement. Everything that happens is experienced from the surface, which means everything that happens disturbs everything else that is happening. The mind that has found its depth does not stop receiving. It starts receiving from a place that can hold what it receives without being overturned by it. This is not a more advanced version of control. This is the absence of control altogether, replaced by a depth that simply is what it is and receives what arrives and remains. Ajahn Chah described a moment he had watched happen many times in his monastery. A student who had been sitting with great difficulty, resisting the pain in the legs, fighting the thoughts, demanding the mind produce something it was not producing, would at some point simply give up fighting, not give up practicing, give up fighting the practice. There would be a moment of complete surrender to what was actually present. The pain was there, the thoughts were there, the restlessness was there. And in that moment of stopping the fight, the student would find something they had not expected. The thing they had been fighting toward was already present. The stillness was not behind the difficulty. It was beneath it. It had been available all along, waiting for the fighting to stop so it could be noticed. Ajahn Chah said, "This is the moment the practice actually begins. Not the moment of sitting down, not the moment of focusing the attention, the moment of stopping the fight against what is already here and finding, in the stopping, something that had been present all along. This is the most significant reversal in everything this teaching has been pointing at. The effort is not towards stillness. The effort is away from disturbance, which is a different direction entirely and a much less exhausting one. Moving towards stillness implies that stillness is distant, that it must be reached, that it requires the practitioner to travel a long way from where they are. Moving away from disturbance implies that stillness is already here, already present beneath the movement, and the practice is simply the removal of what has been placed between the practitioner and the depth they already have. The pool is already deep. The depth has always been there. What the practice offers is not more depth, but the clearing of the sediment that prevents the depth from being visible. And the sediment in the pool is the papanka, the accumulated monuments, the second arrows that were fired and never retrieved, the stories about the first arrow that have been recirculating for months or years, settling at the bottom and then being stirred up again by the next disturbance. Stop adding sediment. Allow it to settle. The depth was always there. The listener who has been carrying something difficult tonight, who came to these words with a weight that was already present, already running, already occupying the forward chamber of awareness, has been fighting that weight for longer than this sitting. The fight takes a particular form, the demand placed on the mind to be different from what it is, to stop producing the thoughts that are being produced, to settle when it is stirred, to be present when it is spinning. The demand is sincere. The exhaustion from the demand is also sincere. The particular tiredness of someone who has been trying to control the weather inside their own mind and has found the weather continuing regardless. The forest pool does not control its weather. It receives its weather, reflects it, and lets it pass, because it has a depth from which passing is possible. The weather passes. The surface settles. The depth remains. And each time the weather passes and the depth is rediscovered, the rediscovery requires a little less effort than it did before, because the mind is learning not how to become still, but how to stop making itself turbulent. Feel where the depth is right now. Underneath the weight that is present tonight, underneath the thoughts that are running, the body sensations that are here, the quality of tiredness or tension or grief that occupies the surface, there is something else. It is harder to name than the weight, because the weight announces itself loudly and this other quality does not. It is simply the awareness that is receiving all of this. The quality that is watching the thoughts without being those thoughts. The quality that is present with the tension without being made entirely of the tension. It has been here throughout this entire sitting, through every image, every teaching, every felt moment of recognition or resistance. It is the depth of the pool, and it is accessible right now, not as an achievement but as a direction, inward and downward, below the surface weather, toward the awareness that has been here all along. Let the attention settle down toward it, not away from the surface. Let the surface be exactly as it is, with everything that is moving on it. Simply downward, toward the quality of awareness itself, the cool layer beneath the weather. The breath is useful here, not as a focus point that is supposed to stop everything else, but as an anchor to the depth, something that is happening at the body level, steady and involuntary, a reminder that the body is here even while the mind is active above it. Feel the weight of the body against whatever is supporting it tonight. The floor, the bed, the chair. The body is already still, already resting, already at the depth, even while the mind produces its weather above. Let the attention follow the body downward, into the weight, into the surface the body rests on, into the quality of stillness that is already here in the body, even now. And in the noticing of the breath, notice also the quality of the noticing itself, the awareness that can notice things without being those things. The thoughts are still there. The feelings are still there. The weight that was present at the beginning of this sitting is still present. And yet there is also something else now, a quality of spaciousness around the difficulty, a sense that the thoughts and feelings that were filling the entire interior are now floating in something larger than themselves. They are still moving. The space around them is apparent now, the depth apparent now, and from that depth, it is possible to watch the movement without being moved. This is the quality the whole of this teaching has been circling, the ground that makes equanimity possible, that makes right effort possible, that makes love without grasping possible. It was here all along. The Buddha described the outcome of samatha practice in the Pali Suttas this way: the mind that has found its stillness is like a lamp in a room without wind. The flame burns clearly. It does not gutter or flicker. Not because there is no fuel. The fuel is still burning, but because the air around it is still enough that the flame can burn with its full light. A mind in ordinary reactive agitation is the flame in a storm, consuming itself rapidly, producing heat rather than light, burning down before it illuminates anything. The mind that has found its depth burns the same fuel with much greater clarity and much less waste, because the depth is still, and from the still depth, things can be seen as they actually are. What the practitioner discovers, with this quality available, is that the difficulty that was present before the depth was found is still present, and it is also considerably smaller than it appeared from the surface. Seen clearly, the first arrow is just the first arrow. The monument that the surface mind constructed from it is gone. This is what non-reactivity was always pointing toward. Not a detachment that does not care. Not a controlled surface over a turbulent interior. Not the white-knuckled equanimity of someone holding their response shut with both hands. The power of not reacting is the power of depth, the depth that can receive what lands without being overturned, that can see what is actually there rather than what the disturbance of the surface suggests is there, and that can respond when response is needed, from a place the building has not touched. The second arrow is made in shallow water. In depth, the first arrow is simply seen, as it is, without the structure built from it, and the seeing itself is already the beginning of something the reactive mind could never produce. A response that is actually proportional to what happened. What remains, when the building has settled and the sediment has cleared, is the quality that was here before the building started. The awareness that was present at the beginning of this sitting, when the first words arrived, before any recognition or resistance had formed. The quality the pool has always had. Depth, clarity, the capacity to hold the weather of an entire day and still reflect the sky at dusk. This is what Ajahn Chah was pointing at when he described the natural mind. The mind before the building, the awareness behind the awareness of difficulty. It cannot be taken away by what lands on the surface. It was not created by good conditions, and it is not destroyed by bad ones. The difficulty that has been present throughout this night does not mean the depth is absent. It simply means the surface has been very active, and the depth has been receiving it without complaint, the way a pool receives an entire storm, and then, when the storm passes, reflects the morning sky with perfect clarity. The storm passes. The depth remains. The depth was never the storm, and the storm was never the depth. And there is a question that has been waiting since the first breath of this sitting, not as a challenge, not as a demand, but as a simple opening, an invitation to look below the surface of everything that has been running tonight. What is here, right now, when you stop fighting? The body is here. The weight of it, the particular heaviness of these limbs against this surface, the warmth of the chest rising and falling in its own slow rhythm. The room is here. The specific quiet of wherever you are tonight. Real, physical, surrounding. This is what was always here. Beneath the weight that arrived with you tonight. Beneath the thoughts that ran while the teaching ran. Beneath the building the mind assembled around the first arrow. The monument, the recirculation,